The judge struck the gavel. He had won. She stood there silent, already defeated. Everyone believed the story was over. But the courtroom doors opened again, and the man who walked in wasn't there to argue. He was there to expose the truth, once and for all. Before this story unfolds, and before the truth turns everything upside down, subscribe now. This is not just a court story. It's about silence, dignity, and how the truth always arrives, even when it's late. At the beginning, their marriage looked ordinary from the outside. No loud fights, no dramatic scenes. Just two people sharing a life that slowly grew uneven. She was the kind of woman who gave quietly. She adjusted her dreams around his schedule, his stress, his ambitions. When he came home tired, she listened. When plans failed, she encouraged him. When sacrifices were needed, she made them without counting the cost. He, however, began to change. Not all at once, but in small, almost invisible ways. His words became shorter, his patience thinner. The gratitude he once showed slowly disappeared. Success made him louder, while her presence became softer in his world. He started to speak over her, decide without her, and treat her support as something he was owed. She noticed the distance growing, but she blamed herself. She tried harder. She stayed quieter. She believed love meant endurance. Friends saw a stable couple. Family saw a marriage that had lasted years. No one saw the loneliness she carried beside him every day. By the time she realized something was truly wrong, the balance was already broken. The marriage wasn't ending with a crash. It was fading, slowly, silently, until only one voice still mattered. The betrayal did not arrive with shouting or slammed doors. It came quietly, wrapped in cold words and careful distance. One evening, he sat across from her and spoke as if he were discussing a routine matter. There was no anger in his voice, no sadness in his eyes, only relief. He told her the marriage was over. Not because of someone else, he said, but because she had become too much, too tired, too emotional, too slow for the future he wanted. She listened without interrupting. Each sentence landed heavier than the last. He claimed she had held him back, that her sacrifices were not contributions, but weaknesses. He spoke of years he had carried her, ignoring how she had quietly carried him first. In that moment, she realized the man she had defended for so long no longer saw her as a partner. She was a liability in his story. The next days moved fast. Papers were prepared without her knowledge. Decisions were made without her voice. He told people she had failed him, that she depended on him for everything, that he was finally choosing freedom. Friends repeated his words. Some avoided her completely. Others offered pity that felt heavier than silence. What hurt most was not the divorce itself, but how easily he erased her role in his life. Years of support were reduced to nothing. Late nights, missed chances, quiet strength, all rewritten as proof that she had no value. She questioned her own memories, wondering when love had turned into accusation. Yet, even then, she did not fight back. She did not correct the lies or defend her past. Something inside her chose stillness. Not because she agreed with him, but because she sensed that arguing would only deepen the damage. She packed her things calmly, leaving behind a home that no longer felt like hers. As she walked away, she believed she was losing everything: her marriage, her stability, her place in the world. What she did not know was that this betrayal was only the beginning, and that the truth he buried so confidently would not stay buried forever. The courtroom was quiet, formal, and cold in its order. She arrived early and took her seat without drawing attention. Her posture was straight, her hands folded calmly, though her chest felt heavy. Around her, voices whispered, lawyers reviewing files, clerks moving papers, strangers waiting for their own judgments. No one looked at her for long. She was just another case on the schedule. He arrived later, confident and unbothered. His steps were firm, his expression relaxed. He greeted his lawyer with familiarity, exchanged light words, and took his place as if he already knew the outcome. The contrast between them was clear. He looked prepared. She looked alone. When the hearing began, his side spoke first. His lawyer's voice was smooth and controlled, filling the room with numbers, dates, and statements that painted a clear picture. One where he was the provider and she was dependent. Charts were presented. Claims were made about income, effort, and responsibility. Each point was delivered with certainty, leaving little space for doubt. She listened quietly. Her name was repeated, but her voice never entered the story. Years of shared work were reduced to footnotes. Her sacrifices were reframed as choices that benefited only her. The narrative was simple and convincing. Power, spoken clearly and confidently, often sounds like truth. When it was her turn, she spoke briefly. She did not accuse. She did not beg. She explained her role in simple words, without emotion. But simplicity carries less weight in a room built on proof. Her statements felt small beside polished arguments and prepared evidence. The judge listened, nodded, and asked a few questions, but the direction was already set. Minutes later, the decision was announced. The ruling favored him. Assets, property, and recognition of contribution all leaned to one side. The gavel struck the desk, final and heavy. The case was declared settled. A quiet shift passed through the room. He allowed himself a small smile. His lawyer closed the file with confidence. People began to stand and gather their things. For everyone else, it was just another ruling. For her, it felt like being erased in front of witnesses, proof that in this room, power had spoken louder than truth. The sound of the gavel still echoed in her mind as people began to move around her. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. Papers were stacked. Conversations resumed, low and casual, as if nothing significant had happened. To the room, it was the end of a case. To her, it felt like the end of a life she had carefully built and quietly protected. She remained seated for a moment, steadying her breath. The ruling had taken more than property and financial security. It had taken her history. Years of shared effort were now officially dismissed, stamped away by a few firm words. Everything she had believed counted. Loyalty, patience, endurance had no legal weight. They did not appear on documents. They could not be proven. When she finally stood, her movements were slow and controlled. She did not look toward him. She did not search for reactions in the crowd. She gathered her bag, the same one she had carried in with quiet hope, and held it close as if it were the last familiar thing left. Her face remained calm, but inside, something fragile was breaking apart. As she walked toward the exit, she felt eyes on her back. Some were curious, some were judgmental, others were simply indifferent. No one stopped her. No one spoke her name. She passed through the hallway alone, each step heavier than the last. Outside the courtroom doors, she paused. This was the moment she realized there was nothing left to fight for in that space. No appeal planned, no words waiting to be spoken. Just loss, clear, final, and complete. She had walked in hoping to be seen. She walked out, officially invisible. Yet even in that moment, she did not cry. She did not collapse or lash out. Instead, she chose stillness. A quiet decision formed within her, not of surrender, but of acceptance. If everything had been taken from her, then nothing could be taken again. What she did not know was that this moment, the one that felt like absolute defeat, was the exact point where the truth began moving toward her. And it was already on its way through the very doors she had just passed. Just as the courtroom began to empty, the heavy doors opened once more. Most people barely noticed. They were already focused on their next appointments, their next cases, their next conversations. To them, the moment had passed. The decision was made. Nothing more could change. But the man who stepped inside did not move with haste or confusion. His pace was measured, his expression calm but firm. He was older, carrying the quiet authority of someone who had spent a lifetime observing before speaking. He paused at the entrance, scanning the room, not for drama, but for understanding. She had already reached the hallway when she felt something shift behind her. Not a sound, not a voice, just a sense that the air had changed. She turned slightly, unsure why, and saw him standing there. Her father. He met her eyes, offering no apology for being late, only reassurance, as if to say, "You did right by staying silent." He approached the bench with respect, addressing the court without raising his voice. He did not argue the ruling. He did not accuse anyone of wrongdoing. Instead, he asked a single question, one that cut through the finality of the moment. Had all financial records been fully reviewed? Specifically, the ones connected to long-standing transfers and ownership arrangements? The room slowed. The judge looked up again, surprised but attentive. The lawyers paused. Papers stopped moving. What had felt finished now felt uncertain. The man explained that he was not there to disrupt the court, only to ensure accuracy. His tone was steady, his words precise. There was no emotion in them, only clarity. He requested permission to submit additional documentation, records that had not been presented, not because they were hidden, but because no one had asked for them. Documents that predated the conflict. Documents that spoke quietly, but clearly, about intent and truth. For the first time, doubt entered the room. The confidence that had filled the space moments earlier began to thin. People returned to their seats. The judge asked for the files. What everyone believed was over suddenly wasn't. And the man many assumed had arrived too late had, in fact, arrived exactly when the truth could no longer be ignored. The documents were handed forward carefully, one folder at a time. They did not look dramatic. No bold labels, no raised voices, just ordinary papers, aged slightly at the edges, signed long before the marriage had begun to fall apart. The judge reviewed the first page in silence, then another. The room, moments ago filled with movement, became completely still. Her father spoke only when asked. He explained that years earlier, when she was just beginning her life with her husband, certain assets had been placed under her name for protection. Not as a secret, but as a safeguard. At the time, no one imagined they would ever matter. The marriage was stable, trust was strong. There was no reason to question intentions. The records showed long-term ownership, property linked directly to her, not as a gift after the marriage failed, but as a decision made during its strongest years. Transfers that had been documented, approved, and legally recorded. Nothing rushed, nothing reactive, everything deliberate. As the judge examined the dates, something shifted. The timeline did not match the story that had been presented earlier. According to the claims made by her husband's side, she had depended entirely on him. Yet here were records proving otherwise. Proof that she was not a burden, not dependent, and not empty-handed. More pages followed. Financial statements revealing that some income attributed to him had, in fact, been built through shared efforts and later secured under her name. The silence grew heavier. His lawyer adjusted in his seat, scanning the pages with increasing urgency. Confidence gave way to calculation. Then came the most unexpected detail. A declaration signed years earlier, acknowledging her role and granting her independent control, something he had once agreed to willingly. It had never been revoked. It had simply been ignored. Questions followed. The judge asked why this information had not been disclosed. There was no clear answer. No one could claim ignorance without consequence. What had been framed as omission now looked like misrepresentation. She stood quietly as the truth unfolded around her. For the first time, she did not feel small in that room. She did not need to speak. The evidence spoke with calm authority, rewriting the narrative that had nearly erased her. The courtroom no longer felt cold. It felt awake. What no one had seen coming was not revenge or chaos, but clarity. And once clarity entered the room, the outcome could no longer remain the same. The judge leaned back, no longer rushing toward closure. The earlier confidence in the room had dissolved, replaced by careful attention. What had once appeared simple was now layered with facts that could not be ignored. The judge requested a brief pause, allowing time to review the documents fully. No one objected. No one spoke. The silence carried more weight than any argument. When the session resumed, the tone had changed completely. The judge addressed the courtroom with measured words, emphasizing the responsibility of fairness and full disclosure. It was made clear that the previous ruling had been based on incomplete information. That alone was enough to reopen the decision. What followed was not dramatic, but it was definitive. The judge explained that the evidence presented established her independent ownership of key assets. Contributions once dismissed were now legally recognized. The narrative that painted her as dependent no longer stood. Each statement was delivered slowly, carefully, as if restoring balance one sentence at a time. Then came the reversal. The earlier verdict was set aside. Asset distribution was reassessed. Properties tied to her name were confirmed as hers. Financial control shifted, not out of punishment, but because the law demanded accuracy. The courtroom listened as the truth reshaped the outcome. Her husband's posture changed. The confidence that had carried him into the room faded. He tried to speak, to explain the omissions, to soften the impact of what had been revealed. The judge stopped him gently but firmly. Explanations were no longer relevant. The record spoke clearly enough. What struck the room most was her reaction. She did not smile. She did not look toward him. There was no satisfaction in her expression. Only calm. The kind that comes from being seen at last, not from winning. The judge concluded by reminding everyone present that courts do not reward volume, confidence, or power. They respond to truth. When truth arrives late, it is still truth, and it still matters. As the gavel fell again, the sound was different this time. Not heavy, not final in a painful way. It marked correction, not loss. People remained seated longer than before, absorbing the shift they had just witnessed. She stood slowly, steady and composed. What had changed everything was not the money or the ruling. It was the restoration of her place in her own story. For the first time since the marriage began to fracture, the world had acknowledged what she had always known. She had never been invisible. She had simply been unheard. Until now. When the courtroom finally cleared, she did not rush toward the doors. She remained still for a moment, letting the noise fade and the weight of the day settle. What had happened inside those walls was not a triumph she needed to celebrate. It was a correction, an alignment of truth and record. The real victory was quieter, and it belonged only to her. She turned to her father and met his eyes. There were no speeches, no dramatic embrace, just a simple nod, filled with understanding. He had not come to rescue her. He had come to stand beside her when the truth needed a voice. She thanked him softly, not for the documents, but for trusting her silence when others misunderstood it. As they walked out together, she felt something she had not felt in a long time: lightness. Not because she had gained something new, but because something heavy had finally been lifted. The fear of being misunderstood no longer followed her. The need to explain herself had disappeared. Outside, the world continued as it always had. People passed by, unaware of the shift that had taken place within her. And that was exactly how she wanted it. Her strength no longer required witnesses. She had learned that dignity does not come from being believed by everyone, but from staying true when no one is listening. She did not think about him as she stepped into the sunlight. His role in her life had already ended, not in court, but long before, when respect had disappeared. The ruling only confirmed what she had already accepted. Closure had arrived quietly. Her victory was not measured in assets or judgments. It was found in freedom. The freedom to begin again without anger, without bitterness, and without fear. She no longer needed to prove her worth. She carried it with her. As she walked forward, she understood something deeply. Sometimes life strips everything away to reveal what was always unbreakable. And sometimes the strongest endings are the ones that leave no scars, only clarity, peace, and the courage to choose yourself. That was her real victory. Sometimes silence is not weakness, it's preparation. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive on time, but it always arrives with truth. If this story moved you, like this video, if you believe dignity matters more than revenge, comment below and subscribe. Because some stories don't shout, they wait, and then they change everything.